So let me explain this syllabus really quickly. Does everyone have one? Okay. So if you look at the very front, we have proctored exams. This is probably the most important part of the syllabus because it deals with the exams that we are going to take in class on Saturdays. Now, we already took test 67 as a diagnostic, right, on August 9th. The next test is on August 23rd. Excellent, Gwen. That is not this Saturday, right? So this Saturday is not a practice exam, so you just have time to work on other things. Now, these tests are the most recent tests that LSAC has released. Test 72, which is the last test on there, which we'll do on September 20th, which is, anyone know what that is? A week before the exam. Yep. That is the June 2014 LSAT. Okay?
I took that. Yeah, me too.
Okay, that's okay.
Take it again.
You can take it again, or we can figure out another test for you to take. It doesn't matter. I mean, the reality is that when you take tests more than once, until you get a 180, you can use it as an opportunity to say, oh, there's still stuff I haven't learned from this test. But we can figure out then what makes the most sense. All right, so now if you look at below that, right? Oh, before I go on, sorry. Those tests are the most important tests because they're the most recent. They're the most representative of what you're going to see on your actual test, which will be test 73. And they're the hardest tests out there. So the test has slowly gotten harder over time. Not a whole lot, so don't get too nervous about that, but it's representative of what it's going to be like. If you've taken a really old LSAT and got a high score, that might not be really where you're at. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now the take-home tests are right below that. I'm going to hand those out tonight, 52 to 57. You can take those at any time on your own whenever you want, right? Now we have about 7 to 8 weeks before the LSAT, and there are 6 take-home tests here. So if you start taking them in a couple weeks from now and take one a week, in addition to the ones that we're taking on Saturday, then you can finish them in time. You don't want to save them all towards the end because then you'll be taking too many tests in a week. 3 or more is probably too many, and it's just overkill and you'll burn yourself out. A lot of you, I suspect, are working all day, and you finish around, 6 or whatever, and then you go home, or you come to this class. So when it comes to taking these take-home tests, you can break them up. There are 4 sections, each 35 minutes long, and so you could say, hey, Monday I'm going to do section 1, Tuesday I'll do section 2, and so on, and that will give you time to take the test, 35 minutes, or take the section, and then review it, and then figure out what you got wrong, and so on. And I'll hand out a supplement that goes with these tests that will show you where you can get explanations for a lot of the questions in those tests. Okay? Because really what you want to do is you want to take a section and then timed and then review it. Okay? Now, handouts tonight, I'll hand out some stuff. The only 2 handouts you have to bring back to class are the green book and the class packet. You see that? So, everything else you can leave at home, including the Fox book. Does everyone here have the Fox book so far? Anyone does not? No? Okay. Anyone else? It's that purple book. You have it? Okay, great. Alrighty. So let's we're gonna jump into games.
What is the class packet?
I'm gonna hand that out. Yeah, as well. Yeah. So I'm gonna hand it out with the green book, and then we'll go from there. Yep. Okay. So now let me hand out the Logic Games book, the packet. This is just a bunch of logic games, and we're going to jump into this right now. Take one, pass that back. Yes, it is. Yes, welcome.
Hi, Alicia.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Hey,
Hey, Tendai.
how are you?
Good, how are you?
Oh, you guys got it. Good, perfect. Are you in the 40-hour class?
Yes.
Or are you? Oh, okay, great. And what was your name? Sorry.
Alicia.
Alicia, nice to meet you. Oh,
I'm the
oh
one
yes,
that
we've
you
been
just
emailing.
emailed.
Yes,
Yeah.
welcome. Okay, you made it. Good.
Where should I sit?
Anywhere you want. Yep. Oh, do we need some more?
I'll just sit over here.
Did you just call by chance?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay,
I
perfect.
couldn't get in the door.
Yes, I'm sorry. You'll get a key card tonight, and you'll be good.
It's a
2 down there.
again.
Okay.
I know.
Here, pass that back. And then you guys.
Weren't you in Russia?
Last summer.
Okay.
Perfect.
Alright. Cool.
All right. So
They did let me
take
come back.
2 or 3 pieces of scratch paper as well, and pass that down. 2 or 3 pieces of scratch paper. Pass it down.
Where were you?
Japan
Oh, okay.
for the year.
So, do you know Haruka?
Haruka. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. She just moved there.
Yeah, I
like,
know.
And Saori.
Yeah, I saw Star-Chan all the time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, they said they haven't met up yet.
And I didn't see Haruka, but I saw Saori like all the time. She's actually like in the same room, like a building, like business building. It's one of my
Angela.
close friends who I interned with.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Yes.
Yeah, I talk to Haruka like every day. now.
Everyone have a games packet? You do not. You have an extra. Ooh. You don't want to do the games twice?
I'm also in RA right now.
Oh, for where?
KW.
No, I know. I mean, like.
Oh, JBKO.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh,
Oh, you send it back out. Oh, okay. You guys are so efficient. All right.
I'm sure that's interesting.
Well.
So here's the deal with the everyone's got games packet and scratch paper, right? Now, let's go ahead and flip through this packet for a half second. If you take a look at page 5, for example, you will see that there are some tips. This is in the games packet. Yep. There are some tips that we're going to talk about tonight. You don't need to read them now. We're going to go through all that. But this is just so you can come back and review the tips later. There are some symbols on pages 8 and 9 for ordering games. There are symbols on 10 and 11 for grouping games and in-out games. There's some review. The in-out games tips actually go for quite a few pages until 14 because they are probably the most intricate game type. But in any case, once you find yourself on page 15, you'll see this big sheet that says track your progress. This is how you're going to get good at the games and fast, which is kind of the key, right? Because there's really 2 steps with the games. There's first is learning how to approach them in an effective way. The second thing is then taking that approach and practicing it until you can do it in 5 to 7 minutes. Because on the actual exam, you have 35 minutes, right? And you're going to get how many games? 4 games, right? Every time. So that's an average of 8 minutes and 45 seconds for each game. The reality is, though, you need to do the easier games, which is typically the first game, not always, but typically the first game, in anywhere from 5 to 7, 8 minutes. And then maybe a medium game in 7 to 8 or 9 minutes, so that you have an extra minute or 2, maybe 3 or 4, for a particularly hard game, right? So instead of hitting that hard game with 8 minutes and 45 seconds, you hit it and you actually have 13 minutes to spare, right? So the hard games typically come 3rd or 4th. Now that's not always the case. The hardest game in the section could be the first one or the second one. But generally speaking, the first games are the easiest and the last games are the hardest in the section. So you need to move quickly. Now, when you do these games tonight and on your own, I wouldn't be surprised if the first time you go through a game, it takes you anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, maybe a half hour for a really hard game or whatever. You're just like, I don't know what's going on here. Don't worry about that. Just try to figure out and understand the game, how to approach it, how to draw it, and all that stuff. And then once you get your mind wrapped around it and you understand why the correct answers are correct, you pull out another blank sheet of paper and you do it again. And that's why I gave you blank sheets of paper, because I don't want you to write in this book. It's your book. You can keep it, and you can do whatever you want with it. Burn it. But I don't want you to write in it so that when you do the games that we do tonight, you can go home and do them again and try to get them down to 5 or 7 minutes. Now, for some of these games, it may take you 5 or 6 times of doing it over and over again to get it down to 5 or 6 minutes. But it totally varies from person to person. For some of you, the games that we do tonight, you'll do them as fast as you need to do them the first time you do them, and that's great. Others of you, you may not do them fast enough tonight, but when you go home, the first time you do it, you'll do it in 6 minutes. And you're like, okay, I'm done with that game. I would consider a game mastered if you can do it in 5 to 7 minutes, 0 wrong. You can move on. So in this chart right here, the first game is singers, right? And we have 4 columns next to it. And in each column, I would write down how long it took you to do the game and how many you got wrong. So the first column is going to have a lot of high numbers probably. Maybe 20 minutes, 2 wrong, whatever. And then as you do that game again, you keep tracking that time, and you'll see it go down as you go across here. And your times will start your start times will start to drop as we go along here, which is actually pretty significant because the Group 1 games are the easiest set in this packet. Group 2 is a little bit harder, Group 3 is even harder, Group 4 is extremely hard. So if your start times are dropping as you're going into harder and harder games, that means you're getting a lot better at doing these games correctly and quickly. Does anyone have any questions so far about how to get faster at the games? Alrighty, so let's go ahead and turn to that first game. And I'm going to give you a few minutes. Oh yeah, you need a packet, okay. Who else needs a games packet? There you go. You need some scratch paper?
Oh, no, I have a bunch.
You have, okay. Oh, scratch. Okay, good. All right. Everyone else? We're good? Okay. So go ahead and turn to that first game, which is the singers game. And Group 1, Game 1. And don't write in your booklet. That way you won't see your notes or your answers from previous when you do it again. Now, if you have, a question and you want to be able to cross off answer choices, just write out A, B, C, D, E on your scratch paper and then start scratching stuff up there. Okay? That way you can keep your game clean. So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to give it your best shot at this game. Do as much as you can do. Most of you will not finish because I'm only going to give you a few minutes. But I just want you to get familiar with the game and try your best. I'll interrupt you, and then we'll talk about the setup. Alrighty, so I apologize. I'm going to interrupt you. This is an ordering game because we're trying to order these singers, right? And no matter what kind of game you encounter, the first thing I would suggest doing is when you look at that paragraph, just take a moment and list out all the variables. Now, they gave us names of people. I never care about the names of the people. I only care about the letters, the first letter, because the reality is the names of the people are always different, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, what tells us that anything in here that tells us this is an ordering game?
It's just that they're gonna perform all exactly at one time.
Oh, yeah, they're all going to perform, what is it exactly? Each singer performing alone, right? That means that you can't have anyone going at the same time. That would turn it into sort of a grouping game plus an ordering game, which would actually be a hybrid game. But since everyone has to be by him or herself, this is an ordering game. Okay, now, because it's an ordering game, I'm going to write out my 7 slots. And I'm going to know, okay, I got slot 1 and I got slot 7. And the first rule says J performs immediately after K. I don't know where J and K go, but I know that they have to be right next to each other, so I'm just going to draw them like that. Because that's how they would actually look in the diagram. Okay? Now the next rule tells us that P performs at some time after M. So this is going to be slightly different. I'm going to write M dash P. And the dash tells me that they don't have to be immediately next to each other. They could be, but they could also be, separate. They just have to appear in this order. Alrighty, so far, so good? Alright. Now the next rule says L performs third only if N performs fifth. Now this is a confusing rule for a lot of people. The word, or I should say the phrase, only if means then. So when I know it's confusing because it has the word if in it, but the phrase only if actually means you're now introducing the then condition, the required condition. So the real way to read this is if L performs third, then, notice I'm replacing only if with then N performs fifth. Okay? Now, the way I would draw this is if L is third, then N is fifth. All right. Is anyone confused by that? Yeah.
If you reverse it, you say like if N performs fifth, doesn't mean that L has to be third, right?
Yeah, if you reversed it, it would be incorrect because all this means is if L ends up in this slot, then you better put N here. But if you put N here, you don't have to put L there. Yeah. Excellent.
They actually would have read it as if N performs fifth, then L performs third.
Yeah, because of the word if, right? But you add that only in front of it, and it flips it around. It's sort of like the difference between saying, I will go to law school only if I get a good score on the LSAT. That's not saying if I get a good score, I'm going to go. It's just saying that's the bare minimum. It's a requirement. I'm not going to go if I don't get a good score. So only if imposes a requirement, something that's necessary, not something that's sufficient. Like if I had said to you, if I get a good score, then I'm going to law school, that would mean as soon as I get a good score, you know I am going to law school. But if I say, I'm going to go to law school only if I get a good score, then that's imposing a requirement, means I can't go unless I get a good score, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go even if I do end up getting a good score. Is that confusing?
I'm getting a little confused.
Yeah. All right, so I guess one way to think about this is if I said to you, if I get a good score, then I'm going to go to law school. Does that mean that if you don't get a good score, you won't go to law school?
Wait, did I get?
So if I said to you, if I get a good score, then I'm going to go to law school. Does that mean that if I don't get a good score, I won't go?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. It's just saying that it's definitely going to happen if I get a good score, right? But if I flip that around and say I'm gonna go to law school only if I get a good score, it all of a sudden it becomes a requirement. So I have to get a good score if I want to go to law school, and if I don't, then I'm not going to go. And so it's completely the opposite of what I said when I just said it with the if. The long and short, the easiest thing to do right now is just to remember that if equals if, but only if equals then. And then we'll keep seeing examples over and over again, and then it'll start to make more and more sense.
Okay.
So shortcut, we got the shortcut. All right. Questions? All right. So the last rule says if P does not perform second, he performs fifth. This is an if-then statement, but what's it essentially saying about P?
He's performing second or fifth.
He's either second or fifth, right? So I would come up here and I would say, okay, P is going to be here or here, and I would do that with an arc. Now, arcs are very different than arrows. Arrows establish an if-then statement. They establish a conditional relationship. They're saying if L ends up here, then N has to end up here. But it's not telling me that L is actually in third or that N is actually in fifth, right? This, on the other hand, is telling me P does have to go in one of these slots. We just don't know which one, so we're going to put an arc to show it bouncing back and forth. Okay. All right. Now, the first question is a very typical or traditional first question, so I would answer it now. And the way to answer these questions is to simply grab a rule and eliminate any answers that violate that rule. So what's the easiest rule to grab in this game?
First one.
Sure. KJ, right? So which answer choice can we get rid of on the basis of KJ? D, K and J are separated, right? So D would be wrong. Okay? The next rule, M has to perform sometime before P, so we have M, P. Which one can we get rid of on the basis of that? Yeah, B hasn't switched around, right? So B would be wrong. The next rule, L performs third only if N performs fifth, so we're going to have to translate that. So if L is third, then N is fifth. This rule only comes into play when what happens?
L is third.
When L is third, right? When L is somewhere else, this rule could just be non-existent. It doesn't matter. But when L is third, all of a sudden things start to happen. So I'm just going to scan down the list looking for instances in which L is third. If L is not third, this rule doesn't matter. So where is L third, and does this rule, is this rule followed or is it violated?
E.
Okay, so in E, L is third, right? And is this a good answer or bad?
Bad.
Bad, because N is fourth, right? And that violates the rule. So then we get rid of E. And then the last rule, P has to be second or fifth. Does that get rid of any of these? What do we have left? We have A and C, right? C, because Patrick is 6. All right, so then we're left with A. So almost all first questions are that sort of question. If it's not, then you'd actually want to move on, and do it later. But if it's that kind of question, just grab a rule and eliminate. The faster you can get through it, the better. The next thing I do when it comes to tackling the questions is I go into the questions that start with if. In this game, all of the remaining questions start with if. So we're just going to go in order. But let's take a look at 7. 7 says, if L is scheduled for the 3rd, which one of the following must be scheduled for the 6th? So in this case, and this is true for all if questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm going to create a new diagram just for question 7. Question 7, yeah, question 7. And I'm going to put L in 3rd. That's the clue that they gave me. And then I'm going to start making inferences on the basis of that clue. Now, there are basically 2 fundamental questions you have to ask yourself. You don't have to, but that can be helpful in helping you make inferences. The 2 questions are, 1, what do you know about the clue that they gave you? Okay, and the answer to that question is n has to be fifth, right? And the next question I ask myself is, who's left? But really what happens here is we keep asking ourselves question 1 over and over and over again every time we get a new clue. And then as soon as you can't answer this question anymore, you come down and ask yourself question 2, and then you go right back up to question 1. So it's just a constant process of asking yourself these questions. So the first question was, what do we know about L in third, right? And Anthony, you said n had to be fifth, right? The next thing I would ask, I'm going to keep asking myself that question. So the new clue is now n is fifth, right? What do we know about n being fifth?
P is second.
P has to be second, right? There's a rule that deals with the fifth slot, and that's going to force P here. Now, what's the next question?
Where could J and K be? Or K and J?
Okay, so first I would ask myself, what do I know about P?
Comes after M.
Comes after M, so that's going to force M. There's nothing wrong with your inference, but in terms of like one process, that would force M to go here, right? Because M has to come before P, and then I would say, what do I know about M? And the answer is, I don't know anything about M at this point, right? We just applied the MP rule, so we're done. So then I would drop down and ask myself, who's left? And who is left at this point? KJ and O. And that's where we'd say, okay, now let's pop back up to question 1 and say, what do we know about KJ and O? One thing we know is that KJ have to be together, right? And this is where you're going with this, right, Nathaniel? You're saying, okay, so since they have to be together, what do we know about them? They have to go in the end in 6 and 7. And so that's going to force that there. Then I say, what do I know about them? I don't know anything, so I drop down again and I say, who's left? And the answer is O. And so then I say, what do I know about O? Well, O's got to go in the last line. Now, I think this is an easier question, and I don't mean to drag it out, but if you break down the steps, those are the steps. You're given a clue, you ask what you know about that clue, that leads to another clue, and then you ask what you know about that clue, and each clue successively leads to another thing until you can no longer make inferences. Now, this question is a little unusual because the initial clue allowed us to fill up the entire thing. That's not very common. Usually, you can make 2 or 3 inferences, and then that's it, right? Now, what's the answer to the question here? It says, which one of the following must be scheduled for the 6th performance? We know the answer is K. And so we're done. Okay. So, any questions on number 7? Now, just really quick, what are we going to do with question 8? Walk me through as many steps as you can remember from question 7. Okay, Anthony, we're going to create a mini diagram for question 8. Yeah, then what?
Apply our rules. You'll put out different rules like L and must follow L.
Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the clue that they give us, right? And we're going to put that in our diagram, and then we're going to start asking these questions and go as far as we can go. Okay, so take a minute and try to do this question as far as you can go. Alrighty, so let's talk about this. The first clue was n is 5th, right? What do we know about n being 5th? P has to be second. Excellent. because P is either second or fifth. It can't be fifth, so it's got to be second. Now, was anyone tempted to draw another inference from this? L is third. Is that correct?
No.
It feels like it, right? Now this says if L is third, then N has to be fifth, but the reverse is not true. So you can't put L in third. I'm not saying it can't go there. It certainly could go there, but we don't know that it must go there.
So only if is I'm so confused about that. So it's always based on the second thing.
Yeah, so only if is introducing the then condition. So it's easier to convert this into an if-then statement before we put it in our diagram. So we take the only if, we throw it out, and we replace it with then. I'm literally just, I'm like an editor right now. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to cross out only if, and then I'm going to write then above it. So then it becomes if L is third, then N is fifth, right? And now that it's in this form, just remember you can never go backwards on the arrow. The arrow is a one-direction thing. Now, sometimes we draw arrows in two ways, but that's because we're saying the if-then clause goes in both ways. But here, it's just going in one direction, and that's very important. Which is why here we're using an arc, and here we're using an if-then statement, because we want to know what direction it's going. Any questions so far? Okay, so we asked ourselves, what do we know about M? We said, that means that P is second, and then what else do we know? What do we know about P? M has to be first. Excellent. And then what do we know about M? I don't see anything because there are no other rules that deal with M other than this one, which we just applied. So then I would say who's left? Who is left at this time? LO and then KJ, right? So does anyone see what has to happen with those four? Here or here. Now you could create two mini diagrams, one with KJ's here, one was there. I think this is probably good enough just to have this floating up here and remember that it's got to go in either one of these, and then OL has to go in the other two. And we don't even know the order of that, right? Because I forgot to mention this. O is a floater because there are no rules affecting O. Okay, so with that in mind, which one following could be true? Could J be scheduled for the sixth performance? No, because it has to be KJ, right? If J is going to go over there. K is scheduled for the second performance. No, it's always P. L is scheduled for the fourth performance. Actually, I don't see a problem with that. We could put KJ over here, right? And then OL or something. I think that's the answer. M is scheduled for the third. No, it's first. O is scheduled for the first. No, it's M. Yeah, it is C after all. Any questions on that? Okay, so this is a simpler game, but we're just trying to get the process down, right? The process is what's going to help things go faster when these things get harder. So go ahead and do 9 and 10, and then we'll talk about it. If you're already done with 9 and 10, because games are your forte, then go ahead and work on game 14, which is the last game in group 1. We are not going to get to that tonight. Alrighty. I don't mean to cut you off. Let's talk about 9 really quick. If m is second, what do we know about m? P has to what?
Somewhere after.
Somewhere after, right? Okay.
I'm not right.
What else do we know about m?
Well, that was in 2, then that's the-
Yes, P has to be in 5. So not only does P have to come sometime after, but according to the P rule, which is either second or fifth, P has to go fifth. Okay, excellent. What do we know about P in slot 5? L can't be third. That's excellent. So the rule says if L is third, then N is fifth. And since P is there right now, there's no way you could put L into third without creating a conflict. Does everyone see that? So L can't go third. That's all we know. It just can't go third. So down here, I'm going to write negative rules, and I'm going to put L and cross it out. So L can't go third. Do we know anything else about P? Nope. So we're going to have to say who's left. Who's left at this point? KJ, L, O, and we must have another one. N. There are 5 left. The only thing we really know here is that KJ, right, has to go in either this slot or that slot. At this point, I would probably just jump into the answers. And now there might be more inferences that we can make. Does anyone see any other inferences that we can make? But even if there were, and we just didn't see them, we want to keep the game moving, so we'll jump into the answers as soon as we hit a wall. Okay, so which one probably could be true? A, J is scheduled for 6. Could J be 6? Same problem as before, right? It's got to be K if we're going to have KJ over here. So A is wrong. B, K is scheduled for 4th. Could we have, it have to be KJ, right? So K could never go 4th. So B is wrong. C, L is scheduled for 3rd. We already figured that that cannot be true because if it were, then N and P would be in conflict. So C is wrong. D, N is scheduled for 5th. Nope. Nick, what do you think about that?
Which one? I'm sorry.
What? Wait, what? Where are we?
Yeah.
D. Question
No.
9, D, right?
No, I've already got someone.
Yep, P is in 5th, right? So I guess it's D. Let's hope D. O is scheduled for 4th. Okay, I'm not sure how this would work, but we put O here, and then what would actually have to go here? N, because it couldn't be L, and it couldn't be K or J, so the only thing left is N. But anyways, that would work. So the answer is E. Any questions on that one? All right, now let's take a look at 10. 10 is a little different than the ones we've seen so far. Instead of telling us where someone goes in the diagram, it just tells us that J is immediately before L. Doesn't matter, we still apply the same thing. So I'd ask myself, what do I know about J and L? What do we know about J and L?
K precedes J.
Yeah, K's got to come immediately before it. And then in terms of L, we know that if L is 3rd, then N is 5th, right? Now, they haven't told us where this block of 3 goes, right? But they are asking us, where can J not go, right? The question is, if this happens, J's performance cannot be scheduled for. So my inclination is we can put this wherever we want, and we're going to just have to start testing these out, really. But my first test would be to have L in 3rd, because that's the only place where something else is going to happen, right? Like if I put this block somewhere where L is not 3rd, then that rule isn't going to be triggered. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the answer, but things start to happen when L is 3rd. So I would test this out with L in 3rd. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would put K and J in 1st and 2nd. L would go 3rd. What would happen? Yeah, N is 5th and P is 5th, right, at the same time. So we'd have to put N here, and then P would have nowhere to go. So this does not work, which is actually why it's the answer, right? This is J cannot go 2nd, because if J goes 2nd, then these things start to happen, and it creates problems. Anyone confused? Anthony.
So explain my confusion, right?
What are you confused about?
So, no, I get it. K and J have to be together. So we put them in first and second. L, but it triggers N and fifth. Right?
Yeah, so this KJL block of 3, we could put anyway. They didn't tell us where it goes in the diagram. We could put it in 1, 2, 3, 2, 3,
But
4.
I get that. We're trying to eliminate the rules. Try to still apply.
I just want. They're saying, hey, where can J not go? Some immediate answers would be J can't go first, right? But we already knew that, so that's not really helpful. We now know that J can't go last, right? Again, they don't provide that, do they? They just give us the middle chunk. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, what do I know about these variables? We know that K comes immediately before J, and we know that L triggers N when L is third. When L is anywhere else, nothing happens. So I'm going to say, it seems like L being third is the most precarious place, because all of a sudden things have to happen that don't have to happen in other locations. So then when we put it there, we start playing it out, and we realize, oh, this is not going to work.
I got it.
You got it?
Slowly, but I got it.
Hey, that's all that matters. Any other questions on this game? Yes?
Just about the process. When you find an answer like this and it happens to be the first one, should you still go through and try and plug in a couple others just to make sure you're right, or is that a waste of time?
Yes, and no. So if it's an easy game and you feel like, I understand the setup, I've seen this type of game before, this is going well, and so far throughout the game you haven't had any trouble finding the correct answer, then as you get through that game, you can basically start picking, as soon as you see the answer, pick it and move on. Now, if it's a really hard game and you're like, I'm not so sure about my answer, even though like I see it, it makes sense, but whatever, I'm not 100% sure, maybe I've diagrammed it incorrectly, then you might want to test some more, especially early on in the game, because if you get 2 correct answers, then right away you know, okay, I'm missing something, you figure that out before you do the rest of the questions. There's also one other consideration too, and that's how long it's been taking you to do the game. Like if you've been taking a long time and you feel like you got to move on, it might make sense, especially the last question. Pick it, move on, take your gamble, so that you can get on to the other games. Yes?
But since this one's a cannot be true, shouldn't, like once we prove that something's not true, we don't need to prove that other
No,
things
you
are
don't.
true, right?
It all just depends on how confident you are that you've actually done that. Like if you hadn't, this is a question that's coming at the end of the game, but like especially if it were a question like the second in the game, and you just proved it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I see why this can't work, but maybe you're not 100% sure. Like this is an easier game, but maybe you're not 100%. You're confused by one of the rules, and so maybe you're worried that even though you just proved it wrong, maybe you proved it wrong on the basis of a misinterpreted rule. Any other questions? Yes.
On the note of strategy and like moving on to and coming back to things,
Yeah.
how do you feel in general about a strategy where in logic games you like do all of the typical first questions and the if-then questions, and then you start to get stumped on any of the more complicated ones, moving on, doing all of those types of questions for the whole section, and then going back
Okay,
to
so you're saying, should I do all the easier questions, in other words, like the if question, so forth, in all 4 games, as opposed to doing all the questions in one game and then moving on to the next game? In general, I would say do all the questions in one game before moving on. Partly because there's so much investment up front in terms of getting your mind wrapped around the rules, and then you're in that mindset, and switching is really tricky. So the only time I would move on is, well, in general, since the games tend to get harder as you go along, not always, but let's say we do the first game. Got it, done. We go to the second game, and we're going through it, and it's like you're having trouble even doing the traditional first question, and you read it again, and you're like, ugh. Unless you feel like you can salvage it, maybe at that point you say, okay, I'm going to go on to another game and come back to this later. But I would have a presumption against that. So the presumption is I'm going to go ahead and do all the first game, all the second game, all the third game, unless I really run into trouble. And even when you run into trouble, you want to kind of try to salvage it because of that investment. But
like if that zone game were second on the
oh, what was wrong with that game?
well,
Yeah. If that were second, I mean, that was really nice of them, actually. This is
To put it last.
to put it last,
Yeah,
yeah, because most
definitely.
people, they didn't get all wrapped up in it and then waste time and then discover. This happens on a lot of previous LSATs. You get wrapped up in the third game and you're pulling your hair out, and then the proctor's like, you have 5 minutes, and finally at like 3 minutes you go to the last game and you're like, oh, this is an ordering game, and you're just like, ting, 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 and it's like really easy, and you don't have any time to do it. So, yeah, you do want to have that flexibility, but go into it thinking that you're not going to go on. Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next game, the Thunderstorm game. Again, pull out a scratch piece of paper, and just give it your best shot. I'll give you about 4 minutes, which is nowhere near enough time to do the whole game, but see how far you can get in 4 minutes.